introduce our next speaker, and this is Miss Alison Bouchault. Alison, I'm not sure about your surname pronunciation. Please forgive me. Alison is the head of the Postgraduate Skills Development Program, which is housed within the Postgraduate Office, PGO, Division for Research Development, or the DRD, at Stellenbosch University. And with a research background in educational support and rich experience in the field of education, Alison is passionate about creating research-related opportunities, support, and resources for SU's postgraduates, enabling them to succeed in their studies. And since 2015, as part of her PGO portfolio, she has been presenting workshops on academic writing integrity, avoiding plagiarism, and manages the online asynchronous course by the same name on SunLearn. Welcome, Alison, and welcome everybody who joined us for this session. I'm sure that you're going to enjoy this session and that it will be very interactive. Alison, you have time until 10:20, and then we could quickly assign 5 minutes to questions, up to 10 minutes, but our next session is again starting at 11:30.
Okay, good.
Please ask any questions in between or pose it in the chat, and we will then pose those questions to Alison. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be a part of your library research week. And yeah, I'm always delighted to be talking to an audience who is also interested and potentially passionate about this topic. Right, so how I'm going to do this is my colleagues at the library are going to be sharing my slides, as you can see on the screen, and I'm going to be working through my session, and as indicated, I'll finish at about 11:20 so that you can ask any potential questions. All right, good. So let's begin. Right, welcome to this session on writing up your research with integrity and utilizing Turnitin as a tool to maintain academic honesty. Today I'm going to take you through an analogy-driven journey where we'll explore the process of constructing a solid fortress that safeguards the integrity of your research. And just as every solid fortress requires strong walls, towers, and vigilant guards, the same principles apply when it comes to writing up your research with integrity. And we're including in this session utilizing Turnitin as a form of a defense mechanism. Great. So, building a fortress begins with a solid foundation. And in the realm of research, integrity forms the bedrock. Research integrity entails adhering to the principles of honesty, accuracy, transparency, and respect for intellectual property. Just as a fortress foundation provides stability, maintaining research integrity ensures the credibility and trustworthiness of your work. Before I launch into the rest of my session, part of building the foundation is becoming aware of, or being aware of, Stellenbosch University's policies on research integrity. One needs to be equipped with the tools and the proverbial weapons before one embarks on writing up your research. So Stellenbosch University has got a variety or a bouquet of policies on research integrity, and here are just a few, and perhaps ones that are most pertinent to this presentation. So there's the Policy for Responsible Research Conduct at Stellenbosch University, and that was recently revised in November 2022. So please take note of that. And then the Policy on Plagiarism in Support of Academic Integrity and the Procedures for the Investigation of Plagiarism. Both of those policies are in the process of or under review, and to the best of my knowledge, they will be available during the course of this year. And reason why I'm mentioning that is because there will be some important new elements included in these policies, specifically this very topical element of artificial intelligence and using such ChatGPT devices when carrying out your research. So there's going to be a clause or an explanation or a guide in the policy regarding that. And that's being developed by our colleagues at the Research Development, and you'll be able to find all these policies on their website. Also search there for any new policies during the course of the year. All right, so the policies include the notion of self-plagiarism, determining plagiarism, how blameworthy is the offence. Students often are concerned or are curious as to how plagiarism allegations are investigated and to what extent can you be found guilty of plagiarism. So there's detail of that, and for example, if you are a first year undergraduate student starting out at university and you've handed an assignment and your lecturer calls you in and says, you know, look, your writing isn't up to scratch, it's showing elements of plagiarism, we need to investigate this. A first year student versus a PhD student with a similar complaint would not have as much consequences as a PhD student. So in other words, the more you progress through your academic career at university and elsewhere, the more blameworthy one becomes because you should have developed your writing and academic integrity skills as you go along.
Alison?
Yes.
I'm just concerned now that I'm not on the correct slide. Where should I be now?
Are you on the policies include the one that has the diagram of moving forward with research for impact?
No, not yet. I'm actually quite far behind.
Yes, okay. Would you like me to take you next slide?
Let me just say, I see now the policies include, and then there's an image at the bottom, moving forward with research for impact.
Yes.
Is that the right one?
That's correct, yes.
All right, then you can just prompt me going forward.
Okay, sure, okay. My apologies.
All right.
All right, so there is the slide that I was just talking to. Thank you. Next slide. So where does artificial intelligence fit in? I'm not going to be looking at this in depth in my presentation, but I know that there are going to be questions, and if you've been following the Research Week's program, you would have seen that the opening program was about artificial intelligence in higher education, and there was a panel of experts discussing the pros and cons of using AI such as ChatGPT. The gist of it is that it's inevitable that students and even staff are going to use artificial intelligence tools. As we progress, you know, technology advances, we need to sort of evolve and keep up with the times. But of course, there are pros and cons, and of course, it is causing major headaches for lecturers in particular, especially with large groups of students who are now finding that, you know, they're unable to really clearly ascertain whether an assignment that was created, you know, off campus or at home is indeed the student's actual work. So this has led to a lot of headaches, as I said, and you know, a lot of lateral thinking as to how to get around and how to seek out assessments that would better reflect a student's ability. But aside from the problems that AI tools can have for academia, there are some benefits, and that's why we're not throwing the proverbial baby out with the bathwater. So our postgraduate officer's standpoint is that AI tools, certain AI tools can be beneficial, and in some fields they're in fact encouraged. For example, in mathematical fields, we understand that students are encouraged to use AI tools to advance certain areas of their research. So there is a place for these tools. And as per what many other presenters have done, what we did actually earlier on this year is we asked ChatGPT how using it can improve one's academic writing. And it very quickly generated this response that you can see on the screen. So yeah, generating new ideas, improving your language and style, enhancing your research in the sense of finding relevant sources in literature, can provide feedback on your writing, can speed up your writing process, and it can overcome writer's block when one experiences writer's block. But I do reiterate, this is only to generate, to develop, to, in a sense, brainstorm ideas. It's not the be-all and end-all. The onus still relies or rests on the individual researcher to tackle their research with integrity. It still involves a lot of nitty-gritty of individual researching, literature searching, writing up and creating arguments, collaborating and seeking out advice from your librarian, etc. But this is investigating some, and I know that the library has also utilized or included some of these so-called AI tools in their bouquets. So keep an eye out for that. Beast that has become very prominent in our room, and let's see how we can tackle it with integrity. All right, good. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So it's when we research paper or a thesis or dissertation, when we put it down on paper, that you as the author, everything that has been reflected in your document. So it's a reader contract that one has. And
Alison? Just so you know, you are breaking up a little. I'm not sure if it's the connection.
My Wi-Fi dropped. Let me. Okay, I'm going to switch to another one. We kicked out, but let me do. We do have load shedding on our side. Hold on a sec.
Okay.
We are just giving Alison time to connect again. In the meantime, I think apologies for the slides that did not move earlier on, but we are all now supposed to see the reader contract slides, and I hope that everybody is able to do that. Please remember the presentation will be recorded. It will be available on the library's YouTube channel. One of my colleagues will share the link to the YouTube channel just now. Mr. Kenny, there's a request from you. Can you unmute and just share your concern?
Hi, apologies. My hand raised is stuck at the moment, so sorry, that was now an accident on my end. Apologies.
No problem.
Okay. Okay. Can you hear me? Am I coming across loud and clear?
Yes, that's much better.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I do have myself plugged into a lithium battery to keep the Wi-Fi going, so we've got all sorts of things as backup. That was an oversight on my part. All right. So I've just been talking about the reader contract. Let's move on to the next slide. And perhaps I'll jog through these a little bit more quickly. So part of writing up your research with academic integrity and using the analogy of building a research fortress, let's look at constructing walls, ethical research practices. So walls are primarily defense against external threats. And in research, ethical practices serve as the walls that protect against misconduct. Clearly define research questions in order to avoid research misconduct or to clarify your integrity. Cite your sources accurately, acknowledge your contributions, and ensure unbiased reporting. So these are just some tips that I'm providing here, and these walls fortify your research and establish a framework of credibility. So from the outset, one would be choosing approaches that of integrity, solid, well studied and practiced research methodologies, tools, and skills, etc. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So if one looks a little bit more closely at how one goes about doing that, one should be aware that academic writing entails building on the ideas and research of others, relying on other scholars' work, but still being original. So this is quite different to what one might experience as an undergraduate student, for example. One isn't necessarily encouraged to build on others' ideas in the sense of, you're not generating a thesis or a dissertation with an original piece of work. But as one progresses to postgraduate level, one is expected to have an opinion and a very clear opinion, but also to rely on those experts in the field to give credibility to your own work. And I'll unpack that a little bit as we go on. Next slide, please. So good academic writing is accurate and trustworthy. Next slide. It involves using the best sources, so choosing your sources carefully, journals that are accredited, consulting with your librarian to guide you, consulting with your supervisor to guide you on people or experts who are in this researching or have researched or done a lot of work on your particular research topic. Yes, and just to add that credibility, making sure that you are using current resources as well. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. And then, of course, good academic writing involves showing off your sources. And by that, I mean citing where you got other people's ideas, referencing in text when you have drawn in somebody else's argument into your argument, and of course referencing at the end of your thesis or dissertation, indicating the full source of your information. So as an academic, perhaps as a novice researcher at honours or master's level, showing off one's sources is especially important because it does show that you have learned from and built on ideas of existing credible, solid arguments and research. Of course, at PhD level, one is becoming the expert, and showing off your sources is to show that you have joined the conversation of scholarly writing. And I'll unpack that a little bit as we go along as well. Next slide, please. So when tackling your academic writing and formulating your arguments, getting it down on paper, you're taking all the sources that you have drawn in your literature search and in your conversations with peers and colleagues, etc. And you use your own logic to put your arguments and content together. And you're constantly comparing, evaluating, and considering what you're reading and what you're writing. You're adding your own questions and views, whether they be actual notes that you jot down or whether these are thoughts that are going on in your head, and you're engaging and showing critical thinking. So as one writes, there's this notion that one has a personal conversation with oneself, and it's this process, this metacognitive thinking, you're thinking about your thinking, that is so important in academic writing. All right, great. So let's move on to the next slide. All right. This is what I was alluding to. Very importantly, academic writing entails developing your own writing voice and joining the scholarly conversations. So this was an epiphany for me when I came across this a couple of years ago, this notion of joining the scholarly conversations, because it made me see myself quite differently. This was when I was doing my master's. It sort of boosted my confidence that I had a voice and I could develop my voice, and that I wasn't just replicating or reproducing or restating what others have said about my research topic or field. I was also joining them in a conversation, a metaphorical conversation. And that too helped me in the way that I structured my content as I wrote up my chapters. So quite a useful resource that I like to refer students and staff to is a resource that's on the Enhancing Postgraduate Environments website. I will give the link further on in my slides, and it's a short video on joining the conversation. Professor Sue McKenna has also written articles on these and in the conversation, the online publications. So there's more on that to elaborate on. But that's just a taste of what is meant by joining the scholarly conversations. Right, next slide, please. So just to draw those threads together, writing up research with integrity entails firstly using ethical principles and practices, then critically engaging with the sources, not just reading and plonking in ideas without considering how it really fits in with what you're saying, explaining your ideas with regard to others, and very importantly, the technical side, using correct paraphrasing when you draw in other people's arguments, and referencing. I can't say that enough. All right, next slide, please. So the paraphrasing aspect is sometimes a what the Afrikaans folk might say, tamaleki, because it can be tricky. Very often we think that paraphrasing or rewording a piece of information that we'd like to draw into our argument is merely about changing out the odd word with a synonym, or rearranging the word order, etc. But it's far more than that. There needs to be critical thinking and much more engagement with the content before one even tries to formulate it into your own words. So what one typically gets at the end of a paraphrase section is one should see that the way that you have reproduced the argument you want to draw into your work, it should almost have a different structure, a different voice coming through, because it's being reflected in your own words. These tips on paraphrasing are elaborated in our postgraduate office postgraduate skills development program, a synchronous course that one can find on Sunlearn, and I'll provide that link. I will share that with the library as well to include with my PowerPoint slides. And this is where we unpack this idea of paraphrasing. But very importantly, paraphrasing is something that you can learn. It's something you can develop. Everybody can do it. It is sometimes tricky, especially for those who are not writing in their home language. But the more you do it, the better you get, and the more confident you become in writing in the language of your thesis or dissertation. All right, and of course, Turnitin plays a role in helping us check whether our paraphrasing is okay or not. Good, let's move on to the next slide. So one of those elements I alluded to earlier on was using accurate citation techniques or referencing. This too is something that can be learned. You need to invest some time and energy into this. Yes, there are wonderful resources like Mendeley, which the library promotes and has wonderful sessions on training one to use Mendeley. So these are referencing tools that one can use. But even if one uses a referencing tool like Mendeley, it's really important to understand the ins and outs of that particular reference technique that you have been asked by your department to use, because sometimes these tools may not be accurate, and sometimes you may feed it incorrect information and then it's not reflecting correctly. So yes, you need to be accurate with your referencing. You need to be consistent in the way you reference. Use the same technique throughout. And you can use the library's website, their webpage on referencing guidelines as a go-to place. Also, your librarian, your faculty librarian, is a wonderful resource to assist you if you are unsure of whether you are referencing correctly. The reason why it's so important to get this accurate is, well, there's various reasons. And one of them is that it shows to your reader, who's often your examiner, that you are a scholar. You are abiding by and taking note of the rules, and you're playing the game of writing up research. And being accurate indicates that you are approaching your writing with integrity. You're including all your sources, you're doing it properly, you're doing it transparently. It also helps the reader, of course, be able to trace your original sources so that they can read further. So referencing is very important for various reasons. Okay, it's not just to act as a policeman. Right, next slide, please. So continuing the analogy of creating a research fortress, let's look at erecting towers and using Turnitin as the watchtower. So towers typically grant a vantage point, a place to stand, a high place to stand to view something from a distance and to give you the upper hand, for lack of a better word. And towers enhance one's surveillance, and they provide early warning systems. So if one uses that analogy, one can see Turnitin as a type of watchtower. So Turnitin is an advanced plagiarism well, I don't want to say that it's not a plagiarism detection tool. It's a similarity detection tool, which can assist us in identifying elements that may be construed as plagiarism. So although Turnitin often promotes itself as a plagiarism detection tool, it is of course fallible, and all it really can do is pick up, it can match texts that is found elsewhere. But it is nevertheless an effective tool as a watchtower for our research fortress. So just as guards oversee the fortress, Turnitin scans your work to detect any signs of unintentional or intentional plagiarism, ensuring that your research is original and properly cited. It can act as an ally, a friend, helping you maintain academic integrity and protecting you against any potential research breaches. So it can pick up problematic areas, prior to it becoming a problem. It can highlight areas that are perhaps problematic that one needs to reword or add in a citation, etc. Okay, good. Let's go on to the next slide. So as Stellenbosch University's policy on plagiarism was mentioned earlier, it's this particular one in support of academic integrity specifically refers students to using Turnitin. It's an examination requirement for postgraduate level as well. I know undergraduate, you often it's just systematically you need to do it, but postgraduate you're also required to submit your thesis or dissertation through Turnitin prior to your examination. Reason why the policy says Turnitin is mainly because Stellenbosch University has got a Turnitin license, so we have a blanket license that is free for students and staff to access, and it's one of the best. There are other similarity detection tools, but we use Turnitin at Stellenbosch University, so thus we are required to use it for our reports. And here again, reiterating that Turnitin can be a useful tool to utilize to improve one's research, writing style, and integrity. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so using the drawbridge, so this is now looking back at a fortress with a drawbridge being lowered there, submitting your work to Turnitin. So a fortress must allow authorized entry and while preventing unauthorized access. So in research, you could unleash the drawbridge. You could lower it by submitting your work to Turnitin. And through this process, you're voluntarily subjecting your research to scrutiny, and you're demonstrating your commitment to integrity. So I encourage you to treat Turnitin as a collaborative partner, using it to refine your work and to identify areas for improvement. Not to see it as what it was typically, and perhaps in some areas is still being done, not to use it or see it as a policeman. It should not be used as a way to only catch students out. It should be used proactively to develop and mold the writer and researcher as they grow in their writing and research abilities. Okay, next slide, please. So part of this requires one to become a vigilant guard. And what I mean by that is that you need to understand Turnitin's capabilities. So guards play a pivotal role in fortifying the fortress and securing its perimeters, its surroundings. So it's important to understand how Turnitin works and to recognize its strengths and its limitations. So the strengths I've mentioned. The limitations, yes, of course, it's just a tool. Students and industrious, devious researchers know how to get around certain elements and how to perhaps generate a report that reflects a lower similarity percentage makes it appear as though one's writing is above board. So yes, there are some weaknesses, but what I often drive home or impress on our students is that although one could trick Turnitin into producing a report that doesn't pick up sections that you may have copied verbatim, or you may have just swapped words out here and there, or you may have hidden text that Turnitin can't pick up. Remember, your reader, especially if this is for examination purposes, is most likely the expert in your field. Your examiners are scholars that your supervisors have sourced because they are the best in their field. And they very often pick up text that is either familiar because they've read it elsewhere as somebody else's work, or sometimes even recognize their own work in the text. So this is part of your academic integrity, viewing yourself as an individual who's reflecting your approach as being one of integrity. Because yes, there are sometimes people who are caught out. All right, so one needs to learn to interpret the similarity reports. You need to identify areas that require further citation or paraphrasing. And you need to ensure that your work aligns with Stellenbosch University's guidelines, policies, your faculty department guidelines of how to write up research, etc. And by training yourself to be a vigilant guard, you actively safeguard the integrity of your research. All right, so this takes time. It's not a quick fix, as is the whole research process. Next slide, please. So an example of a capability of Turnitin is that Turnitin can be set up as a sandbox or a playground. This is what is also referred to in the policy on plagiarism. And what a sandbox is it's how the Turnitin plugin has been set up to accept documents, but not to allow them to go all the way through into the Turnitin repository. So this allows you to then submit the same document numerous times via the same Turnitin plugin to improve your writing technique. But it's very important always to check before you use a Turnitin plugin or link whether that plugin has been set up as a sandbox. So, for example, the one that the library and SunLearn promote is set up as a sandbox, and our postgraduate office plugin is set up as a sandbox, and many of the departments and faculties have their own individual departmental Turnitin plugins that are set up as sandboxes. So it's always very important to find out which one you should be using and to stick to that particular one, because if you submit a document to one Turnitin plugin and then you refine it and then you submit it to another plugin, even if it's within Stellenbosch University, it can pick up the text from your earlier submission and give a inaccurate reflection. It will indicate that you have copied somebody else's work when in fact it is actually your own. All right, so you need to understand how Turnitin works. Let's move on to the next slide. And we too have various resources explaining Turnitin and its functions on our website. I do refer to those at the end of my presentation. And then one needs to look very closely at the type of similarities that are being picked up in a Turnitin report. You're not focusing on that similarity percentage, which very often we were encouraged to focus on at undergraduate level in particular, because you were told, for example, that your report shouldn't be more than 5% similarity. And that's actually a moot point. That doesn't help whatsoever. One can actually have a 0% similarity and have plagiarized within your text. So let's move on to the next slide. This resource is by Professor Sue McKenna from Rhodes University, and I find it particularly helpful in explaining the misuses of Turnitin and also how Turnitin works, and the gives insight into how one should be writing up one's research, how one approaches academic writing. So to me it's a key. If this is the only resource that you look at after my presentation, then I think you would have gained a lot of insight, and the link will be available in the slides that we share later. All right, next slide, please. So part of enforcing your research fortress would be to conduct regular patrols. And so as a fortress requires ongoing maintenance and regular patrols to ensure its strength and effectiveness, similarly your research work demands iterative refinement. Regularly reviewing the feedback provided by Turnitin, but also very importantly by your supervisors, and making the necessary revisions and inserting citations where they are missing. And by maintaining the continuous improvement cycle, you reinforce the walls and enhance the overall integrity of your work. So, as I said earlier, research and writing up is a process. It's iterative, which means it repeats, it goes around in circles, and each time it grows and it develops and it improves. So this is a very important element. It can't be rushed. Nobody who starts the beginning of their PhD is already an expert researcher showing original research, but by the time that they have worked through their 3 or 4 years of PhD, and they've engaged the materials and they've developed their doctoral graduate attributes, they have become a better researcher and an expert in their own right. So we're all growing, we're all moving forward, we're all learning as we progress. All right, good. Next slide, please. So I've included in my slides some of the resources that are available to Stellenbosch University students and staff. And we house a number of guides on our postgraduate office website under the Postgraduate Skills Development Programs Resources tab. And I encourage you to please explore those. And then, of course, the Library and Information Services has extensive resources, not only on referencing, also on the research process and on various elements such as writing up a literature review, etc., etc. So there's an abundance of information on the library's website. And then if you need to look at the more technical issues, if you struggle with Turnitin technical issues such as you're not receiving a report once you've submitted to Turnitin, it's been days and you still haven't received a report, then you would contact the Sunlearn team. They have a web link that you can log a request, or you can phone them directly. And also importantly, the Writing Lab, which is part of the Language Centre, offers consultation sessions to students and staff. You can book a session with them either in person or online, and they will guide you to discuss elements that you may be struggling with in your academic writing, including referencing. If you're struggling to reference or to incorporate the idea of referencing into your in-text referencing. All right, so there's a lot of people available to support you, and there are a lot of e-resources available to support you. Next slide, please. So zooming in a bit more at the Language Centre's writing resources, they have a helpful writing style guide available on their website under their resources galore section in English and Afrikaans, and I believe they are in the process of updating it. Yeah, so keep a lookout for the updated version. And then let's move on. The following resources all come from the Enhancing Postgraduate Environments website I referred to earlier in my presentation. And there's a range of academic writing resources on this website. And the reason why I love this website, apart from the fact that we were involved in developing it as part of an EU project, the reason why I really like it is because it's South African contextualized, and it speaks to our South African scholarly approaches and needs. And it's a bit more familiar, perhaps, than if one had to do a Google search and find something from an American university or an Australian one. So, yes, it's a collaboration between a number of South African universities as well as a few international universities. Good. So there are these wonderful resources. I am a big fan of Professor Sue McKenna, so one will see that many of these resources are by her. She is a leading voice on supporting particularly doctoral students in academic writing. And I love the way she just, sums up in a nutshell or really gets to the core of what one really should be doing and, clarifies things so beautifully. All right, next slide, please. So a couple more of the EPE resources, which are really important, to investigate, especially if one wants to develop your own voice, if you want to make sure that you're drawing in your own arguments, if you want to make sure that you're engaging critical thinking. Actually, just generating and writing freehand is encouraged. It's one of the best ways not only to avoid or overcome writer's block, but it engages both sides of our brain hemispheres and versus just typing something up on a computer. So have a look at those resources and remember, because writing is a process and this whole learning is about growth, these type of tools, these journals and approaches to just writing and not relying too heavily on the text that you're finding the experts are using, these are essential to develop your own voice, as I said, and to avoid plagiarism. All right. Sometimes it sounds like it's more work, but actually it streamlines your thinking and speeds things up. All right, so we're now at our recap slide, and you may have some questions, but let me just jog through these. This is what I covered during my presentation. I've indicated that to ensure your integrity in academic writing, you need to critically engage with others' ideas. You need to develop your own writing voice. You need to join the scholarly conversations. Then you need to get the technical nitty-gritty right. So you need to paraphrase correctly, cite your paraphrase sections, cite quotes correctly, cite your own material if relevant. Otherwise, it would be seen as self-plagiarism, and reference correctly. And then lastly, utilize Turnitin to assess how you're doing by using a sandbox, and start using Turnitin as this developmental tool right from the beginning of your writing, even when you're writing up your proposal, even before that, when you're writing up your notes or formulating your arguments. Because the earlier you pick up irregularities, the quicker you adapt to a better style and you gain insight into best practices. Okay, and this is in conclusion. So as I conclude this analogy of the construction of a research fortress, I hope I've shed some light on the significance of writing up your research with integrity and the importance of bracing Turnitin as a writing tool. Just as a well-structured fortress can withstand external forces, research supported by various mechanisms, including Turnitin's scrutiny, will thrive in the academic realm. Remember, integrity is the foundation upon which your reputation as a researcher is built. And by utilizing all of these skills that I've covered in this session and Turnitin wisely, you can ensure that your fortress remains impenetrable and that your work maintains its credibility and authenticity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alison. There are 2 questions. We have about 3 minutes. Yeah, they're both by Peter. I'm pleased to learn that USB embraces the value of using AI. USB recently recognized and advised on the in-text citation / referencing for AI-related content. Would this not impede the researcher's integrity as it is assessed? The reason I ask is that in some instances, one would potentially not include the referencing for fear of being labeled as not putting in as much effort into your own research.
Okay, so yeah, there's clearly a lot of ways to answer that question, and it is indeed a very good question. But what I can say from my point of view is that it rests very heavily on the way that you go about using the AI information that you have drawn in, for what purposes, etc., and to be transparent in your research when you write up to indicate that this is what you use and why you used it. But what some environments also do, and this is even before AI, if there is any concern that, for example, an examiner from another institution who's an external examiner won't know that, your department has encouraged one to use AI, one would include a disclaimer at the beginning of one's thesis or dissertation to indicate that that this is encouraged by your department. So it's sort of putting it out there up front from the beginning that So there's going to be many more discussions about AI and how to incorporate it into your research, and different fields are going to have different takes and different answers to that. But the fact that USB has already incorporated that means that they've already been in intense dialogue about what it means, and so I encourage you to inquire within your environment whether there would be some dialogue or a conversation or a seminar that would shed more light on or elaborate on what they've indicated in their policy. I don't know if that helps at all.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Then Peter also asked, based on the exposure I had on Turnitin thus far, I have noticed that in most instances, 8% of the similarity report comprises the assignment template. For example, my last similarity report prior to final submission was 14%, of which 8% is related to the assignment template.
Okay.
Prescripts.
Quick answer. What one should upload to Turnitin to generate a report is only the body of your assignment or thesis or dissertation. So you don't include your title page, your contents, your declaration, your acknowledgements. You just include, in the case of theses and dissertations, the chapters. You can exclude the references right at the end because Turnitin is not looking at that. What is interesting or important to your supervisor, your examiner, is whether your content is your own. Yeah, does that help? So take away all the superfluous stuff, the pages that are not relevant, that Turnitin doesn't need to look at, and you should get a cleaner report just focusing on your actual chapters.
Yes, thank you. I think it's also very clear on the Turnitin page. Then lastly, we've got a minute or two. Mr. Assam would like to ask a question. Please unmute yourself.
Sure.
That's fine. Let me just be quick. So I see on the international Turnitin site, there is a Turnitin plugin for Word. Do we have access to that?
Do you know that I don't know if you've looked at Stellenbosch University, have you been in a Turnitin plugin recently, but just a month or so ago, I noticed that there is now an AI tool that's incorporated into the Turnitin plugins. So I haven't investigated it myself in depth, but yeah, there's IT folk are incorporating AI into the Turnitin functions. But I'm not the expert, so I can't elaborate on that. But yeah, it's our university is being proactive in this whole way that things are developing, yeah, globally.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alison. This was now very interesting and insightful session. I think you allayed a lot of fear around Turnitin and when people get their similarity reports. So thank you so much for that. We really do appreciate it. Thank you for the time and all the valuable input that you shared with us. I think you also stress that generate, develop, brainstorm when embarking on your research, and then tackle your research with integrity, but most important also, collaborate with your librarian and seek advice. That was what stood out for me. Yeah, we have to end now because our next session is going to start. Thank you so much, everybody. And please join us for the session with Elmarie Kruger that is going to speak about self-care and mental health. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.